12th Regulators and Policymakers Retreat 2011, brought to you by the IPPAI. We're in Goa, and the theme this year is Paradoxes of India. We all safely, of course, agree that India is a land of many paradoxes. On the one hand, you have this rapid economic development, and then there's talk of lack of development in certain pockets of the country. There's also, of course, the other point about a stable government that comes up so often. We've had the current government in power for a number of years, and yet it has been plagued by controversy after controversy, scam after scam. And of course, even on the level of the people themselves, so much talk about this rapid development and how some of the new technologies and new systems get embraced so quickly in India. And yet, what about the cultural traditions and the aspirations of the people? Let me quickly introduce to you a great panel that's here with us today to take you through all of this. First up, on my left, we've got Mr. Joe Johnson, Member of Parliament from the UK. Great to have you with us. Speaking of government representative, we have a former Power Minister with us as well, Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Suhel Seth does not really need an introduction, but well, Managing Partner, Counselage India. And Mr. John Elliott, who's a blog writer for Riding the Elephant. That's your blog. And of course, you're also the India representative of Fortunes. Gentlemen, this is now a very interesting topic, no doubt, simply because it's also something that we're grappling with on a daily basis here in the country. The potential that the country has, and at the same time, there's always been a lot of talk about decline of values on the other side. What's happening as far as the culture of the country is concerned? Does social reform need to come first before economic reform can truly set in? Mr. Prabhu, you do believe that this is the way to go. How quickly can the two sort of find a meeting point, though?
You know, I've always said, what is reform? And to begin with, let us understand that. The reform is something, there is something deformed, then we need reform. So, the deformation can be corrected with reforming systems about that. So that is another matter. Then, so I'm just saying, on social issues, we need, the government is not a social reformer. We need, therefore, currents outside the government. We should be encouraged to really bring about this reforming system. In that sense, I'm looking at a great opportunity in what is happening today. In case of so-called civil society upsurge, people wanting to do something. So this can be channelized.
And that energy needs to be sort of channeled.
I think that should not be, constrained by Lokpal. Lokpal is necessary. But is it something that Lokpal is going to be now solve all the problems of the country? Not really. So therefore, can we channelize this social current, this social movement, which is emerging in such a significant way to create a much bigger social agenda wherein we can change it. And the second point is on social issues. The issue and the values come in. This all happens because of the mindsets of people. Government should do what the government is supposed to be doing, and they are not doing that. And government should be talking in one voice in terms of issues that they need to do, and there should be parallel current. We should work on that. So I'm not saying one against the other. Not I'm saying which should come first. Must happen parallelly.
So are these two sides of the same coin? I mean, when you talk about something like a decline of values versus economic development or economic potential even, should one be sacrificed at the altar of the other? I mean, is that necessarily how it needs to go?
I'm a great believer that we don't have declining values. On the contrary, certain values have not declined and they are resurgent. For instance, look at the way the youth have reacted and the way the youth have supported Anna Hazare. It's another matter whether you believe in civil society of that kind or you believe in fast. That's a separate issue. If you look at the values per se, I think today's youth is more cognizant and aware of their roles in society and are looking down upon corruption and looking down upon all the waywardness we've seen. The politicians are also seeing an engaged citizenry and therefore are more careful about what they're doing. It's the bureaucracy which now needs to fall in line. And the bureaucracy will only fall in line when it recognizes that its independence will not be thwarted by political expediency, which has been the case for long. So you've had an intrinsic pool of intellect which needs to be harnessed. So to blame one and not the other would be foolish. I think by and large, we have all been responsible for letting our country down. The fact that we recognize that we've let our country down is a huge achievement.
John Elliott, I also want to get a sense from you. The connotation of all of this, when you look at something like these values, what people want, their aspirations, whether they need a change, whether they want a change, are there two connotations? All this talk about two Indias, when we see the economic potential, we're not necessarily seeing it all across the country. So what about the people in those pockets of the country where none of this message is reaching?
The economic reforms have transformed opportunity, but it's only changed basically in the urban areas. It's only changed for the 300 million and their families. How much it's changed in the northeast or how much it's changed in the poorer areas, the rural areas, I'm not claiming to know because I haven't travelled there. Well, not enough to have a view. But clearly there is a generational change. I've always been fascinated by whether the current young generation, or will they really want this place to change? I think that was the significance of the Hazari thing. I think this was the same sort of realization by the middle class in this case, by the professional middle class, the young, that life should be changed. But as other people have said, everybody's involved in it. Somebody wrote, I think it was Sheila Reddy wrote a marvelous line in the Outlook when she was writing about the Hazari movement, where she said, but it's all very well for all these youngsters to go out and complain about corruption, but how do they think how do they think that their bureaucrat fathers paid for their education in America? Everybody has benefited in some way from it. But yes, I do believe that there's huge change going on, but not obviously across the country because it hasn't reached across yet.
Joe Johnson, tell us this. When you look at a situation like this, we all agree, everybody in this room I'm sure agrees that this energy and this movement that we've seen amongst India's youth, that's a great change, it's very positive. But yet there seems to be some ambiguity about how do you channel that energy into the right direction, and who therefore needs to channel that energy. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the interesting channels that's emerged in Britain is the power of the internet to channel people's focus, and Twitter in the last 2 or 3 weeks has played an absolutely critical role. What happened was consumers, middle-class consumers, started tweeting to each other about which companies were still advertising in News International-owned publications. And this amazing groundswell of fury built up on Twitter about any company that was still placing ads in Murdoch's papers. So it was that Twitter power, that consumer power as expressed over this channel of the internet, that drained the lifeblood away from news of the world. And not only that, the possibility that the draining away of advertising would start to affect Sky, start to affect even perhaps the Wall Street Journal and other publications that he owns around the world and media interests he owns around the world. So faced with that very effective channel of the internet, change came very, very rapidly.
But we've seen, we have of course seen this even in the Middle East where so many movements were led by Facebook, Twitter. In a country like India though, Mr. Prabhu, tell us, do you think, can this be enough of an instrument of social change?
There's a huge demand side which is coming in terms of wanting the change. The supply side is failing up undoubtedly, but demand side is huge. Therefore, we really need to identify at least the common denominator in terms of what should be the change that we really want. And if we can do that, there are means of doing it. There are many ways. One is education is one of the principal way of doing it. We can have, even I think, we are failing a point in this. We must use religion very effectively. The influence of religion on Indian mind is phenomenal. If we can use the religion for type of social change that we talk about and actually talk to the religious leaders and actually make them create this common agenda, will be a phenomenal thing. So we must use all the instruments available to us, all the institutions available to us, who could influence the people's mind to bring about it.
But tell me this, and let me again start from the far end of the room. When you look at a situation like this, when you look at, one of the channels that's been suggested is maybe talking to religious leaders. What about the role that the judiciary needs to play or that regulators need to play?
You are living in a borderless world as far as communication is concerned. You're talking about clusters across causes. You're not talking about clusters built on caste. So tomorrow, if I believe, and Greenpeace is doing it magnificently, they are creating cause clusters and saying that if you believe that certain things need to change qua energy efficiency or blah, 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 start that cluster. And we're seeing that.
The whole point about how India is viewed from outside, we know all of this is happening. We know that despite some of this, some of that huge potential that we keep coming back to, this economic potential exists. That's something you can't take away from the country. In the United States, just 2 weeks ago, you had Pranab Mukherjee engaging with the Treasury Department, and this big message kept coming back, recurrent message from the United States, which said, reforms, 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 and until reforms happen, all this big investment that's just waiting to leap into India isn't going to come. That's, of course, the message from the American corporates and not so much the government. But is that necessarily going to be the message for corporates around the world who are looking to invest into India?
What has happened in the last 6 months is that the Commonwealth Games, in particular, and the telecom scam, has dragged this country's reputation way down in a way that has never happened before. I mean, this country is brilliant at having a crisis and then finding another one which buries the one before. Maybe that's Jugaad too. But it's always happened. The Commonwealth Games rang around the world, and so does the telecom scam. And that's the sort of question that is being asked. And Pranab Mukherjee going to America, I was sitting in Britain watching both countries from there, has no impact because nobody believes him anymore. Nobody believes that it's working.
But there are certain corporates who will have a 15, 20, 30-year view on this and not necessarily a 5-year view. Specific sectors like in manufacturing, you have automobiles, for example, where despite a muddled sort of a policy over the last few years where you don't really know exactly which way the policy is going to go in terms of taxation, big investments are still coming in. We've seen, in fact, a lot of British companies over the last 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, Britain is re-engaging with India as rapidly as it can. I mean, I think arguably, one of the biggest causes of chaos has been the failure to reform on the agriculture front, the pressure on prices that's created, and the tensions in many parts of the country that have arisen as a result of that. The other point I'd like to make on the reform side is that it seems to always be a very defensive approach that you often hear at these sorts of conferences where people say, why should we budge up from 26% on insurance, etc.? Why do we need to go to 49? Why do we need to go to 74? We'll do it at our own pace and when we want at a time of our choosing. Well, that's fine if that's the public discourse for domestic consumption in the media. But that, of course, doesn't reflect the substance of what's actually going on in international trade negotiations when India has aggressive objectives of its own to pursue on the world stage, whether it's in the form of penetrating markets for Indian companies overseas. It won't have escaped any of your notice that the biggest employer in the UK now is an Indian company. It's Tata. So, fine to have a domestically focused defensive discourse, but you've got to realize India has some very, very serious commercial objectives which it pursues very effectively overseas.
We certainly hope that there will be positive changes. Thank you, gentlemen, for speaking to us and expressing your views. Welcome back. We're going to stick to our broad theme of government and the citizen engagement, but within that we will look now at accountability, the maintenance of ethics and transparency in government. Over the last few months in particular, we've seen citizen engagement on this front. We've heard lots of noise being made, lots of voices being heard, but does that necessarily ensure long-term accountability? Well, we'll grapple with those issues and more now with another special panel that's joining us here. With us, we've got Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, General Secretary of the BJP, member of Rajya Sabha as well. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Mr. Dhanendra Kumar is the former Chairman, Competition Commission of India. Thank you as well, sir. And also joining us is Ms. Shoma Chaudhury, the Managing Editor at Tehelka. Thanks, ma'am, for being here. Democracy has been India's greatest strength. In many ways, it has also sometimes been the one reason why so many people have always found cause for concern or found things slipping through the cracks as well. But what we've seen of late, what we've seen especially over the last few months, the civil society movement, now there is a growing fear that all of this energy that's been built up, it's not going to be channeled the right way. We're not going to find that having achieved a certain amount of national attention to this issue, what comes from here on may not really have far-reaching consequences. Is that something that worries you, Mr. Prasad?
I'm not worried about it. Yes, what is the positive of it? The positive of it, that the present ruling dispensation cannot afford to ignore the need for an effective Lokpal. And as a political activist, Siddharth, I very strongly feel I have great hope in the youth of the country. I have tremendous hope. I keep on touring the country, meeting them, interacting with them. And the kind of vision they have, they are not despondent. They are not defeatist. They are not pessimistic. And the biggest responsibility today for those who govern, whether in opposition or ruling party, or bureaucrats, civil service, or the media, is to ensure that there is this hope gets all the more channelized that India indeed has a great future. Because why I say so, don't forget, all the big growth India undertook when we had weak central governments, not one party big rule, 2/3, 3/4 majority. That's a big hope.
All right, so is that a big hope? Do you agree? I mean, this is obviously a nice, strong, young demographic that India boasts of today, but specific to something like this, being able to channel this energy, like I said, is that the one hope left?
In fact, I was going to say that what I do see as a very positive sign is that just till about a couple of years ago, the big issues in our country used to be communalism, identity issues, reservations. Today, the fact that governance and corruption are really the big conversations everywhere, even when you go down to the ground, people are demanding accountability. The Right to Information Act has been a huge influence in the country. I think if the parliamentary debates around Lokpal are good, they are thoughtful about the future. It's not just about brinkmanship and showing one or the other party in bad light. I think then I would be hopeful. Today, corruption, particularly financial corruption, has become so complex that you need people with extreme expertise to look through all of that, so that the society is also not caught in a constant sense of crisis and hysteria because it is ransom to people who do not understand it, but because you're caught in a kind of public mood, it becomes difficult to do truth-telling. So I would feel safer if there were men and women of competence put in very powerful positions to be vigilant on their area of expertise, not that there's a generalist body who's going to look at everything.
In fact, Mr. Prasad, I have to come back to you right away for that, because there is that worry always, right, at the back of everybody's mind, especially people who sit at home and either read about this or watch this on television, who are going to say that, they're never going to get past their petty differences, etc. Given that accountability that Ms. Chaudhury just mentioned, saying that, look, what's happened in the last few months means that no political party or no politician can really afford not to take some sort of action or not to be seen as proactive on this front. Can we expect some sort of a national debate that has a good outcome?
I'll surely come to that, but Shoma raised a very interesting question, competence. I think Satyam Computers has some of the most competent people on board. What happened? The Shahid Balwaz and the GB Realities have good chartered accountants. Harvard, Boston. What happened? This question you cannot wish away. When we talk of degeneration and accountability, what we are happening in the corporate sector, we have to recognize. And there's a lot to be explained. Why should a big industrialist who has been feted by India for generations need to write to a regional leader that your minister is doing a wonderful job? Why? What for? I'm really amazed to see that. Therefore, a lot of introspection has to be there in corporate sector, who are supposed to be the biggest beacon of competence in India.
Well, the good news is that some of that is coming to light as well now.
Yeah.
So that is the good news.
And second, a positive aspect in Indian democracy is that this whole anti-incumbency is no more a relevant factor. If you perform or perceive to be performer, people trust you again. You have seen the case of Madhya Pradesh, in Gujarat, in Chhattisgarh, in Delhi, in Bihar. Therefore, people trust the political leaders. They don't despise them as we do. That if you are seen to be a performer, and that's a very healthy sign. As far as, obviously I can speak for my party. We are very clear that country needs an effective Lokpal. Advani ji, Arun Jaitley have already stated that in 2001 we said that PM needs to be covered. That we stand for. But what sign of articulation shall be there when the draft comes in the floor of the House? There is a need for proper Lokpal, effective, time-bound action. That larger premise cannot be wished away. And I wish to assure you today in this interaction that as far as we in the BJP are concerned, we are willing to go whole hog for it. And I think if the government come with a constructive dialogue, we can find a way out.
Mr. Kumar, let me bring you into this. We are talking about the whole aspect of even corporate India now sort of being under the scanner. An interesting aspect is what you mentioned earlier, which is that competition in a sense also has an impact on corruption. And you were talking about the positive impact, but there's also the flip side of it, which is that because of the increased competition, we have seen a lot of things happening within corporate circles which weren't happening earlier, like we've seen in the case of telecom, let's say. So how do you now say that, all right, on the one hand, you've got something like the Lokpal in place, which is looking at, you know, the polity, which is looking at the judiciary, which is looking, but what about corporates? I mean, very often what happens in corporate circles does not even come to light.
Corporates are accountable to their shareholders, and the board of directors there, they have a huge responsibility. It also brings me to the issue of transparency, that there has to be completely transparent publication of their accounts, and then various agencies which are involved. Talking of competition, there are a number of issues, whole plethora of issues, that India has a number of positives, and we refer to the elections, we refer to number of other things also. But coming back to the economic terms, we cannot ignore the fact that during the days of financial turmoil, when the entire Western world was witnessing zero or negative rate of growth, India still had a healthy rate of growth of 6 to 6.5%. And that was the result of the resilience of the Indian economy.
Those are also very important questions given the situation India finds itself in the overall global economic climate as well.
Unless you have got fair ethical standards in your corporate governance, you cannot survive too long. And Indian corporates need to realize that. And as I said, if there is a dynamic process of accountability, Siddharth, it is not that politicians would be the victim only and the corporate sector and the media and others would elude it. Even those who are espousing it today, like the civil society itself. If your brand is good, then your respect goes above. Come on, let's be very honest about it.
All right, this whole question of moving towards governance with accountability, with transparency, to many it sounds idealistic. Let me start in fact from the other end and get your views first, Ms. Chaudhury. Can we get there? How long will it take?
I would say it's the climate of inspiration. We change the kind of discourse that has come to be accepted in public discourse in our country, and there I think the media plays as important a role as we were saying politicians indulge in brinkmanship. I think the most pathetic level that Indian journalism has fallen to is that we shove mics in front of politicians' faces, and instead of holding them accountable to large vision statements, to large electoral statements they made, we are always sniping at them to get that one soundbite where they will snipe at some other politician, and that's our headline.
You get the daily headline.
So we are really bringing politics down to its lowest level, and I think the media is very, very responsible for that. We have to change that ourselves.
Mr. Kumar, do you think that change from within is possible?
I have a tremendous faith in Indian youth, and they are changing the system wherever they can. Also tremendous faith in the common man, and it is the people of India who will force things to change.
Yes,
you raised a very fundamental question. Every time a new idea has come, it has been resisted. But India has ultimately welcomed that idea.
At the end, the good news is that we've been left with a sense of hope. There's also a sense that we're on the right side or the good side of intent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.